If you've been on the hunt for a crib sheet for your nursery or for a gift, and you just can't find anything that you love, I am going to teach you how to make one. This is going to be a crib sheet with elastic all the way around, so it's going to fit nice and snugly on the mattress. I'm going to show you how to do a standard crib sheet, a mini crib sheet, or a bassinet crib sheet, and also how to figure out how to get it to fit any mattress or playpen pad that you have. So first, I want to do a little disclaimer. This is a product for a baby and where they sleep. So I'm just going to teach you how to sew it. It is up to you to decide what materials you are comfortable with, whatever laws you need to follow if you're going to try and sew and sell these. I'm just giving you the instructions. You get to decide on all the materials. And then number two, I'm going to remind you, please, please, please pre-wash this fabric. I will admit sometimes I'm lazy and I don't pre-wash my fabric for a project, but for something like this that is going to be going through the laundry a lot, you absolutely want to pre-shrink your fabric, because if you sew it together and then it shrinks even a little bit, it might not fit the mattress very well, and that would be a bit of effort for one use. So now that we got the disclaimer and the pre-washing out of the way, let's get started. In this demo, I'm going to be making a mini crib sheet because that works the best with a traditional cotton quilted fabric. And this is from my Golf Days collection. It's going to be so cute on my nephew's crib. If you want to make a standard size crib sheet, you are going to need to start with a little bit wider fabric. It has to be 44 to 44.5 inches wide after you have pre-washed your fabric. This fabric ended up being 42 inches wide, so it wasn't quite wide enough to do a standard crib sheet, but it works for a mini, which you can also use for travel crib sheets, pack and plays, things like that. So what I have done is pre-washed, as I mentioned, ironed it, and then I folded it in half and then in half again. The goal is to get all four open corners together. You want to make sure before you do any cutting that you have triple checked that these corners have no folds, because if you mistakenly grab this corner and cut where it's folded, you'll be using this fabric for something else and not a crib sheet, because you will have cut a hole out of the center of the sheet. So this is cut to size 48.5 inches by 35.5 inches. And then I'm going to cut a square out of the corner that is 5 3/4 inches square. I usually don't use it upside down, but I want to because I just want to make sure it's showing me 5 3/4, 5 3/4. Now I'm just going to use a heat-resistant pen, so this will disappear once it is heated with an iron, but we are going to cut it, so it's probably not going to stay on there. Okay, so this is what we're going to cut out. You can either use a rotary cutter or scissors, and I like to use a combination. I don't like to use a rotary cutter all the way to this corner, because if I go over, it's going to mess up my crib sheet, which would be a big bummer. So I'm going to use the rotary cutter to about here and then snip the end with scissors. And if you have to turn it, just make sure it stays lined up properly in these corners. Now we can set that aside and use it for a different project. It would be perfect for a little quilt square. You could make a little receiving blanket that matches the crib sheet. Wouldn't that just be so cute? If you watch many of my videos, and I hope that you do, you'll know that I'm a huge fan of fabric clips. But for this project, I prefer pins because we're going to be doing 4 corners on a pretty big piece of fabric, and I want to make sure nothing slips. So what we're going to do next, we're going to pin each corner together. So basically, you're going to lay this as flat as you can on your space, and then you're going to fold up the cutout corner right sides together, and you're just going to pin. And we're going to do that on all 4 corners. Okay, all 4 corners are pinned, and we're going to go to the sewing machine and sew these corners. Now we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam. I'm just going to go straight, and then I'm going to come back and zigzag to prevent this from fraying. So you can either use the guides on your sewing machine, or one thing that my niece and I like to do when she is learning to sew is sometimes I will take a piece of washi tape and I will put it down. And I use washi tape because it's removable and it's not going to leave residue on your sewing machine. So I will put it down so I have a much longer guide to watch with my fabric. And then I always just double check with a gauge ruler. I set it at 1/4 inch and I make sure the distance between my needle and my tape is going to be 1/4 inch. And now that I have that straight line sewn, I'm going to switch to a zigzag. And if your machine does this, I chose a right zigzag so that the needle is going to be on the far side of, this is the right side of the stitching. So I can just have my fabric go where that stitching is going to be. And then I'm just adjusting how long and how wide it is going to be. I don't want the zigzag to go over this stitch. I want it on this side, just so it's protecting it from fraying. All right, so you can see we have our 1/4 inch seam, which is going to be nice and straight. And then the zigzag, that gives a really nice seam. So then when we turn it around, this is what the front is going to look like. That's going to go over the edge of the crib. So it's going to look super professional. Another option, instead of doing a straight stitch and a zigzag, is to use an overlock stitch. And that basically means it's going to do both of them at the same time. It's going to do a straight line down the left and zigzag to prevent your fabric from fraying. So on the Janome sewing machine, they have a specific foot for that. It has this little metal thing here that's going to guide. So I'm just going to feed it and guide the fabric along here. And then this little number is going to do all the rest of the work for me. So let's get that done. So you can see it did the line and the overlock for me. So that is an overlock versus a straight stitch plus a zigzag. So there's the difference. They're both 1/4 inch. They both serve the same purpose. It just depends on which you prefer and whether your machine will do an overlock versus a straight and a zigzag. Now that we have our 4 corners, look how perfect they look. We are going to do a bit of ironing to make the casing for the elastic. So what you're going to do is you're going to iron a 1/4 inch and then a 1/2 inch all the way around. And I find it helpful to use a gauge, a little measure gauge. This is put at the 1/4 inch. So as I'm ironing, I can just double check that I'm staying pretty consistent with a 1/4 inch. Now for a standard size crib sheet, if you are using a wider fabric and can cut to 68.5 by 44.5 inches, you will be able to do this 1/4 inch before the 1/2 inch. So all the raw edges will be sealed inside. Otherwise, if you can only go to 68 by 44, you're going to zigzag all the way around and then simply fold it up like that. But I do like the concealed raw edges where I can. Now it's pressed at a 1/4 inch over all the way around. So I'm going to adjust my gauge to 1/2 inch. And then I'm going to press 1/2 inch. Well, I didn't eyeball it well. That's why I use this. It is your best friend. Now that we have that pressed, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, we are going to sew close to this edge to make the casing for our elastic, leaving 1 inch to 1.5 inches open so that you can insert your elastic. All right, we're to our last step. We have to add the elastic into this channel that we just created. If you were sewing masks like a maniac in 2020 and have any elastic left over, it's probably perfect. This is a 1/4 inch flat braided elastic, and you can see it stretches, bounces back quite nicely. So every elastic is a little bit different. You want one that's got a good bounce back so that this is going to fit well onto a mattress. So I have cut this piece to 54 inches long, and I'm going to put a quilting safety pin in it. And I'm going to go through it twice instead of just once, so it's not as much pull on the end of the elastic. And then, oh my gosh, this just always reminds me of my grandmother. She taught me how to do this years and years and years ago. You're just going to slide it through. This is a great activity to do while you are watching TV because we got a bit of a length to go. Now, the one thing to remember is the length of the elastic is a little bit less than half the length of the channel. So you want to make sure you don't get so meditative doing this that you just keep pulling it all the way through. This end needs to stay out. So what you could do, if you're nervous about forgetting that, is just kind of fold that over. And here come my favorite clips. I'm just going to clip that. As you get further along, it gets pretty bunched up. So you can just kind of pull along there and get more of that elastic into the channel. Uh-oh, Houston, we hit a snag. I went too far from the edge and now my safety pin won't go through. So I'm going to have to use my handy dandy seam ripper, take a couple stitches out because I do not want to start over. All right, let's see if that is enough to get moving again. All right, yay. But I do need to make sure I remember to sew that part shut again. So I am going to put a clip on the fabric just to remind me. All right, so now I'm going to go back to the sewing machine and we're going to sew these two pieces together. And I want to make sure it stays flat. So I'm going to pay attention to how it's coming out of each side and make sure that this is not twisted when I clip these together. I'm overlapping the elastic about 1 inch and I'm going to sew it together with a zigzag stitch. So I've left the clip on the far end so that it's a little bit easier to keep them lined up. You obviously do not want your fingers near this when you're stitching. I'm going to carefully get that under there. Okay, so as long as you get it lined up well in the beginning, you should be good to go. I also am going to keep my scissors here because it's a great way to just press down and make sure everything is guiding through. So I'm going to let go of this clip now and I'm going to use my scissors. So here we go. It is together. So now we have to pull this elastic so that it all goes inside. We don't want this big loop hanging out. So you're just going to just keep pulling to move the elastic kind of evenly around your crib sheet. And then I need to find that section that I had to open for turning. There it is. And so I need to get that flat, go back to a straight stitch. And I'm going to have to hold that open so that it doesn't do that, so that I can sew along there. So now we are continuing to just try and move this elastic around so that it gets all pulled in and we can close the original hole where we threaded it. Okay, it's not sticking out anymore. We can now sew that shut. And now it's all done except for the evening out of the fabric on the elastic, which you are just going to work with your hands like this. And then you're going to be ready to go. What a fun project for your baby, for a grandbaby, for a baby shower gift, new baby gift. I can't wait to see this somewhere with my cute little great nephew on it. Remember when we had to cut the fabric to get it to the perfect size to make this mini crib sheet? I kept that little strip of fabric to use as a tie for a gift. So if you make this or anything else for baby with my Golf Days fabric, you can go to my website and click on it and you'll get a link to get this free printable so you can have a cute golf themed gift tag to go with your present for baby.